Okay. Well, it is wonderful to see so many faces in the room and people gathered together. Welcome to the Global Media Education Summit, the 14th Global Media Education Summit. My name is Stuart Points. I am a professor and director of the School of Communication, who's one of our hosts for the Global Media Education Summit. It is lovely to see so many of you in the room, to see this collection of people gathered together again after a 3-year absence. There's a tremendous amount of effort and work that goes into bringing these things together as we remind ourselves, doing them again after a break for 3 years. And it's really wonderful that Vancouver decided to just show itself off on your right for many of you, which is fabulous. And our hope all along is that the day would turn out to be sunny so that in the backdrop would be the North Shore Mountains, and that would help to welcome us to Vancouver and to our event. We have a very exciting 3 days together, and there will be much to share together, and I want to tell you about elements of our program. The 14th Global Media Education Summit is a collaboration between the Center for Excellence in Media Practice at Bournemouth University and the School of Communication at SFU. And we have been collaborating over the last year to bring this together, and we're really very happy to have this day finally arrive. So let me get underway by saying that some thank yous to Julian McDougall, Karen Fowler-Watt, who you're going to meet very shortly as part of setting up the Media Education Summit, Isabella Orega and Laura Hampshaw, who's not able to be with us. Issa is, and we're so grateful for her. I also want to share thanks to the McLuhan Foundation and Carolyn Wilson and David Nosbakken, who have been crucial, our organizing committee here, many of whom are in the room, including Layla Cameron, who's our conference coordinator at the back of the room, who, if you have questions or concerns over our time together, Layla's standing at the back halfway with the registration desk, halfway with us here. Without Layla, this event does not come off, and so it's really important to acknowledge the labor that goes into making these things happen. And I'm very grateful for all that Layla has done to allow this to come together. Also, tremendous thanks to Nicole Stewart, Robin Ilton G, Michael Hooksman, and Alicia Baines that you will meet from our local organizing committee as chairs and other things over the course of our 3 days together. We have a remarkable range of keynotes who you will hear from over the course of the weekend. Today, starting us off, Wendy Hugh Kwong Chung and Amy Harris will begin, and tremendously excited to have them from SFU as our opening keynote. Claudia Magallanes Blanco from Mexico will, I was going to say Mexico, but I'm going to stop that. Claudia, it's really wonderful to have you here. Earlier, when we were talking about the possibility of people coming together when restrictions on borders and such made it really difficult to imagine travel, we thought Claudia would be joining us by virtual feed, and it's wonderful to have you in person. I want to acknowledge as well that we have a number of people coming in to this keynote event virtually. And so to Stephen and Gray on the side who are managing our virtual feed, we're really grateful to them. We have Mark Sermon, who will be delivering a keynote from the Mozilla Foundation on Saturday. And in addition, we have the most remarkable Alyssa Soap, who you will hear from at a number of different occasions from youth media, as well as other remarkable contributions to our field that some of you will know. And Antonio Lopez, who is one of the key, if not the key figures in eco-media literacy in our field today. And we're really grateful for Antonio's arrival and the contributions that he will bring to our time together. So we have a rich and wonderful program organized around the theme Media Eduecologies. And we wanted to create this compound word that is an awkward word, but it brings together a reality of our field today, which is faced with a set of remarkable challenges before us, a set of social crises, that our field in some ways has been called upon to respond to answer to. I think we all feel a strong sense today that the field of media literacy, media education has been called to again in this moment of immense disinformation and misinformation, of environmental crisis, of climate disaster and climate change that's around us, of a whole host of other crises, health crises, housing crises in many cities, tremendous sense of inequity that threatens and challenges so many of our societies. These are the issues that our field is called upon in civic locations around the world, in civic centers in our cities, to address and respond to with a host of different audiences, publics, some young, increasingly some older. The field of media education, as we all know, has long been dedicated to the work of addressing the needs and the concerns of young people in our societies. And I say that recognizing that we have many people from a variety of different countries with us, and our societies are afflicted by crises and challenges in different ways. Nonetheless, our effort to respond to those challenges alongside and with young people has been a central drive of our field. I think we also acknowledge, though, that focus on the worlds of young people has begun to change as the concerns of disinformation and misinformation, as the concerns of other social crises are upon us, that the need to bring media education to older audiences is also now part of our work and something that drives us forward. In setting up the theme of media edu-ecologies, we created this construction in order to capture a complex set of ecological, environmental concerns now at the very center of our field. The first concern is that posed by the climate crisis and instability in the Anthropocene, which for our field raises profound questions of media, materiality, and the legacies of Western modernity, as Antonio's work has helped us to understand. It calls attention to how media infrastructures operate in nature and how these systems are and can be engaged through new research, new conceptual frameworks, new practices and pedagogies that address the place of the environment across global mediated life. The second challenge, where the ecological is mediated, media is also now and for so long has been an environment, as Paulo Granada's work, among so many others, helps us to understand. The second challenge is thus that posed by our new socio-technological digital order, the impact of which has changed how we live everyday life. Through algorithms, surveillance structures, and social media, our media is an ecology, an environment we habitually live through and connect with, and that in turn watches us and weaves our behavior into a data order. Together, these overlapping concerns demand understanding, demand action on an ecological scale. And in this context, the traditions of media education and media and information literacy have much to offer and have already proven to be powerful in responding to the rise of algorithmic cultures, disinformation and misinformation, information warfare, and the representation of nature, race, ethnicity, indigeneity, and various forms of difference across societies. The response to the CFP for our summit has been really remarkable. We've had a wonderful response to the call to come together again, and we've been tremendously grateful for that. The program that will unfold over the next couple of days will feature panels, conversations, book launches, a special session on the board game The Media with Paulo Granada, I mentioned a moment ago, and more, including the Youth Media Education Summit, which I want to talk about in a little bit. That's one of the special features of the Global Media Education Summit, is a parallel event happening alongside us. And we'll talk a little bit about that program, which is a really rich and wonderful program this year. And we're tremendously grateful to Sean Holman, who's helping to lead that. It's part of welcoming us to the place where we are, to the land where we are, to the land that we are all visitors on, that we are, as I am, a settler on. We, in this part of the world, recognize the need to acknowledge the original inhabitants and owners of these lands, and to recognize our responsibility to that history and to that ongoing presence that sets the conditions for the future of a decolonial Canada and a decolonialized countries around the world. With that in mind, it's a tremendous honor to welcome now to the stage Deborah Sparrow, Musqueam weaver, artist and knowledge keeper, to offer an Indigenous welcome and land acknowledgement. Deborah.
Why, thank you for that. Hi, everybody. I'm glad the sun did shine for you today. On behalf of my chief, Wayne Sparrow, who, yes, shares the same last name as me, but he's my little brother. And I taught him everything he knows, that's why he's chief. On behalf of him and our council and our community, our villages throughout this lower mainland, and behalf of, we look across to the mountains of Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh, our relatives, our friends. We're shareholders in some parts of the city and in some parts we are not. And so that's always a difficult thing when it comes to acknowledgements and land acknowledgements. And I always like to say, how long are we going to be doing land acknowledgements? But, you know, it's relatively new for us for the last, say, 5 or 6 so years, because we weren't acknowledged in our own lands prior to that. We talk about the histories of this place we call Vancouver, and we talk about stories, but let's start talking about the real stories, the stories of the foundation of the people who lived and thrived here and welcomed everyone in the 1700s. And for that, many stories have gone unheard. And so that's why it's so important to come forward. Many people say to me, you know, what is protocol? Some people don't even know. I have relatives from different nations who never knew how to even address it. And I think it goes across the board for everyone. I mean, it's when we come to another country, we have to abide by and respect the rules of that country. And this is how it trickles into all of our lives, is that we share. And I always like to quote the wonderful and beautiful and late Maya Angelou when she says, we're just as much alike as we are different. And so let's celebrate our differences as well. And I like that about her, how her worldview was. So stories are important. But one thing that all of us have noticed over the years is the negativity around the stories, the world stories, the media, and how the media relates those stories to the public in a way sometimes that we don't want to watch anymore. You know, we don't want to turn the TV on or listen to the radio because it doesn't feel very good. The stories are not the happiest stories, and yet they're real. And we've been talking about reconciliation and residential schools for these last years very seriously, and saying, how do we reconcile? And I don't even know if there's an answer. You know, we wrote down how many points that we would follow. And I don't know if the government's even following them. You know, they like to get up here on the mic and say, oh, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. But, you know, someone living in our villages and communities, we don't see that yet. And then we have situations happening that the media reports about, you know, how politics are and how they trickle down into all of our communities. And, you know, it's not always the right stories. And so I'm wanting to start a new way of looking at media, of telling good stories, beautiful stories, stories that make us happy, stories that give us a light at the end of the tunnel. We've been in the darkness for 2 years, and coming out of it back into the light, we need to shine the light on humanity in a way that shifts us away from the darkness. I know we still have to report things that are going on, but when are we going to start reporting what's going on good? You know, I know maybe they don't sell as much, maybe they don't seem as exciting, but there are many of us living in the world that want to hear the good things too about what's going on in Brazil. That's good. What's going on in China? That's good. Are there anything? Because we only hear the negative. So we need a shift. If we can pull that and have it been going on for so many years, can't we start to make a shift towards the goodness? You have the power to do that. It's very powerful. It's powerful that you have the power to tell the story, and it's up to you how you want to do it. And I just believe in the beauty of humanity, in all of you, every walk of life. We all are the fibers. And we have forgotten that we're attached to the fibers of life because we've been on a fast track. And when everything happened with COVID, a tiny little thing made us stop in our tracks. Very powerful, very tiny, made us all stop in our tracks, and nobody could go anywhere for 2 years. We had to stay home and decide whether we wanted a vaccine or not. Then we have the conspiracy theories. And that becomes scary, and everybody's scared. Everybody's got anxiety. Everybody's trapped in their homes. But are we really trapped? Or is it a time that we can reevaluate who we are? Did we reevaluate who we are? We talk about global warming and about what crisis we're in. But the first thing that we do when we can and COVID lifts is to get on a plane and take off. Well, wait a minute. Isn't global warming about everything that a plane lets go of? Are we not getting it? I don't understand. I mean, maybe some of you feel the same way, but I was shocked when everybody started jumping on a plane and then getting really ticked at the airports when the airports couldn't do what they wanted. And I felt like saying, why didn't you stay home with your children and your family and your roots? There's beautiful walks here. There's beautiful lakes and rivers. There's mountains. Why do we feel like we have to jump on a plane and go away from it? And these are just questions that come into my mind, and I don't know if they're in other people's spirits or minds. But I want to live in a beautiful place, and I want my great-grandchildren and the greatest grandchildren to be able to live here too. And if I don't stop, then where are we going to be? And I wonder if one voice makes a difference. Maybe we should ask little Greta. But this is something that I really am like, I'm taken back by. And so we have so much to be responsible for. And when I talk about the fibers of life, I'm literally meaning the fibers, because if we are not careful, we will have no more fibers. And then we will have no jobs, and then we'll have no life, and then we'll have nothing. So we really need to pay attention to what the signs are. And that's what I feel is important. And, you know, not all Indigenous people anymore are caretakers of the land. It sounds really nice, but we've been assimilated. We were taken away from our land and put into residential school and made to think the same way and assimilate like everyone else, that we're not valuable until we have a degree in your education system. We are nothing until we do that. And so we too are guilty of not taking care of our land. We too are guilty of all the same things. And so we're all in this together. And if we look around the world, on many communities, we see the same thing happening in the forests all over the world. And we need our forests, or we're not going to breathe. But what does it take for us to really, really absorb it? Because it doesn't seem like it's happening. And so I don't know what the answers are, but maybe you do, because you have a voice. You have the eyes to tell the stories, the visions. You have the ability to help us listen. And so it's pretty amazing how you move and how you decide to tell your stories. And I'm here to tell the stories of my people who lived and thrived in this land. And for 85 years, I never identified with the textiles or being a weaver because I didn't know about it. And so I had to educate myself. And in educating myself and being excited about it and passionate about it and falling deeply in love with it, it connected to the history that I didn't know much about. It gave me a sense of value and more success than I could have got anywhere else. So I stand on it. I stand in who I am. And my grandfather, who lived to be 100, who shared all these stories with me, it wasn't hearsay. He drove me along the city of Vancouver, all the way out to New Westminster, up to other places, and he showed me where we lived, where our villages were, where our people were. And he shared that with me, and he said to me, he lived to be 100, and he said, "You always remember what I told you?" And I said, "Of course I will." He said, "Because if you don't know who you are, and you don't know where you come from, they'll get you." And he meant it, because when he was about 77 or so, he had to go to Supreme Court and be a witness for a golf course that we have called Shaughnessy, where there was a breach of contract. And they said in the end, when the case was finished, that if Mr. Sparrow wasn't there to defend the integrity and the values of our people, we wouldn't have won that case. So we won it based on his knowledge. And my friend said, "Deborah Sparrow, knowledge keeper." I only have a little drop of knowledge compared to what he had and his people. And I have to keep drawing on it, but I draw on it in a way that still connects me to them. And I ask them for more. It's in our DNA. Your knowledge is in your DNA. Your history, your knowledge that connects you to your people. It's not just hearsay. It's not just words. It's in your DNA. All of us have that ability to be connected, that gives us a sense of why we even exist. And that's why I love what I do, because it stays me connected, it stays me believing, it keeps me focused. And I'm in awe of the history of our people. And I'm just merely the spokesperson for them. I merely accommodate what they want me to do. And I listen. And I'm sure that's what you all do in your jobs, is listen and tell the stories. So on behalf of my chief and the chiefs from this territory, but mostly on behalf of my ancestors, I wish you all good words as you move through the next few days, and want you to remember when you go back out into the world, to remember to tell the good stories too. So Hajj Kasiyam to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for reminding us of our collective responsibility and our need to listen, to hear each other, and to take that wisdom that we bring together, to build on that, to get a greater sense of our capacity to address the disappointments and sadness that's part of our world, but also to celebrate our time when we can be together to do that work and to build a better future. I'm grateful for your words. Thank you. As I mentioned, the Global Media Education Summit is a collaboration across the ocean. And it's been a remarkable building effort over the last 14 months. And to share words on that and to welcome you, it's my honor to introduce Karen Fowler-Wallet, Deputy Head of the Bournemouth University's Center for Excellence in Media Practice. Karen, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Deborah talked also about connecting and reconnecting, and Julian, Isabella and I arrived Tuesday night, and we took a long walk yesterday, and sort of explored a little, and we've met some of you, looking forward to meeting many more of you, but we've all been talking about that desire to reconnect and the opportunity that this gives us to do so. So we are really excited to be meeting here for the 14th Media Education Summit, as Stuart reminded us, is indeed the 14th. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the summit and then just a little bit about Kemp, and just to sort of share with you, what we do and where we're coming from. Vancouver's always been on my bucket list, so personally I'm so excited to be here, and it's just looking stunning today, but even in the snow yesterday it was looking pretty amazing. And we are also really excited that we are here together, but we have taken the opportunity that the pandemic offered us to meet online, and so we do, as Stuart also mentioned, have the virtual strand, and you are all please encouraged to engage with that. The two are very much connected, to use that word again. Thank you, Stuart, for hosting us so beautifully. We've loved working with Stuart and his team over the past year. It has been long in the planning, and we have had to meet at 8 a.m. your time and 4 p.m. our time, but we've had many good conversations over Zoom, and it's been a lot of fun. This idea was born back in 2018 when we were in Hong Kong for the last MES that we were able to be together for. And as that drew to a close, we plotted and planned to come together in Vancouver for the next international summit. Little did we know 18 months later we would all be hit by a global pandemic. Our plans to bring the summit home in the interim to the city of Leeds were then shelved, delayed, and we finally did that virtually in 2021. Many of you were online for that. And whilst it was a great experience, as I say, it's wonderful here, a couple of years on, to be able to reconnect and to be in Vancouver. As I say, we've balanced now the opportunity that the pandemic gave us really to connect with colleagues and to bring online really into a sort of rather more central aspect of the summit. So that I hope is something that you will explore and that you will find really interesting, because we have got some amazing speakers and panels in that strand. So the Media Education Summit is this really important gathering of media educators, but one of its unique aspects, we think, is that it's also more than that. It brings together academics, educators and practitioners. That's my own personal background. I'm a journalist by background and have always felt very welcome in this very mutually supportive community, which I think is such an important thing within academic environments. And we talked about sharing stories. I think we do that with compassion and with mutual understanding. I always go away with so many new ideas from these gatherings. So that's one of the sort of unique aspects of it. Another is its international profile, and we have met in Prague, we've met in Rome, we've gone to Boston, we met in Segovia, and also, as I mentioned, Hong Kong. So Vancouver is the next in the series, and obviously not forgetting the UK in between those times. Another unique feature of the Media Education Summit is the Youth Summit, which Stuart's going to talk about in more detail, but again, an incredibly important aspect of what we do with the younger generation, listening to them, taking on board their ideas, providing a space in which they can bring their ideas and their voices, and those are always incredibly rich and interesting experiences for us. So we're really looking forward to what you've got in store there. Each year, as Stuart also mentioned, we adopt a theme, and he has described the theme with great eloquence to you already. But we do that in an effort to take the conversation and the field in different and new directions, and to try to sort of perhaps lead change, offer provocations and interventions, which again might then get some sort of traction and interest around them. So again, it's a dynamic entity, and that's really important to us. Finally, I'd just like to say a few words about the Centre for Excellence in Media Practice, or KEMP as it's fondly known, and please do tag it on your social media if you can. We are based at Bournemouth University, but as I hope you've already got a sense of, we're very much an international research centre. And we have an EdD, a Doctor of Education in Creative Media Practice, which is wholly online, but for that reason, in many ways, people from all over the world engage with it. And that's a big programme of which we're very proud. And I hope if anyone's interested in pursuing doctoral research, you might take a look at for what we offer there. We also have a really active and rich and diverse group of visiting scholars, several of whom are here today, both in person and joining us online. We appreciate that relationship hugely, and we really care very much about it. So I hope that you can see how the importance of that connection by listening to them as they speak and share their ideas in the Media Education Summit this year. So I'll close by saying it's wonderful to be here speaking on behalf of Julian, Isabella, and myself, and also Laura, who's done a lot of the heavy lifting behind the scenes and can't be here. We hope you have a fantastic couple of days. Really look forward to getting to know you better. And thank you very much for being here.
I recognize that volume, and we're going to adjust and play with this until we hit the sweet spot of this. So I thank you how's the sound now? Is this okay for folks in the back? We're okay? Okay, and I will move the mic up just so it's more available. And Stephen was pointing out for our virtual participants, that's obviously really important. Karen, thank you so much. Thank you for the welcome. Thank you for the collaboration and camaraderie. It's been really wonderful working together on this. And as much as our days are different, our aims have been common, and it's been really a pleasure to work together. One of the unique parts of the Media Education Summit is the Youth Media Education Summit. And that's a program that brings together a group of young people in the city where the event is happening for a focused program, often that involves some kind of media production. And this year, in the planning for this year's Media Education Summit, with the theme that we have, we wanted to focus in on young people and media responses to the environmental crisis, to climate crisis. And working together with Dr. Sean Holman who's a journalist and a professor at University of Victoria, just on the island, Vancouver Island, for those of you who are visiting. Sean runs the Climate Disaster Project, and the Climate Disaster Project is a remarkable initiative that aims to take personal stories of encounters with climate disaster and climate change and turn those into journalistic accounts. In part because I think we're learning in environmental communication that our ability to address and respond to climate crisis is in part about allowing our own experiences to resonate more broadly so that our collective responsibility and the impact of climate crisis lives through our actions and not just through our minds and our cognitive understanding. Science communication is obviously a crucial part of that, but what the Climate Disaster Project does is take accounts that young people and others have experienced with encountering climate disaster events, and to bring that impact into a kind of journalistic reality that others can see and learn from, and in ways that resonate with their own experience. Many of you will know in British Columbia, for those of you who live here with me, for those of you who are visitors, we have been afflicted, as many of you have, with very significant climate change, climate disaster, climate crisis events over the last 3 years. A year and a half ago now, there were really massive floods that isolated the lower mainland from the rest of the province because all the highways were washed out. 13 bridges on one of the major highways was washed out. It was months before real connections were established again. That's only one indication, and there are many. There are living in Vancouver now, we go through annual forest fire events that bring smoke into the city that make breathing for major parts of the year difficult. Last year, that went into late October, which wasn't supposed to happen until 2050. It wasn't supposed to be until 2050 that forest fires would extend throughout the year, that would bring smoke into cities and make everyday life extraordinarily difficult. That's now an annual reality. The Climate Disaster Project is an effort to respond and to build up momentum in response to that. And so we have 15 young people who are coming together with a team of mentors and leaders who are going to work with them to develop those stories. And we're tremendously excited about that. As part of that program, we're really very grateful. I am very grateful to welcome and to have Dr. Lissa Soap with us from Youth Media in Oakland. As I mentioned earlier, some of you will know Lissa's work, which has been part of the field of media education, media literacy for a couple of decades. Her contributions have been amongst the most significant. And Lissa's going to spend time with the Climate Disaster Project, as well as come back and be part of our closing plenary. And so we're very glad and very happy to have Lissa with us. A few administrative details now before we move ourselves to the center of this evening's event, which is our keynote. Some things, the program app, the program that has been set up in Oxford Abstracts. Many of you will know this obviously by now, and Oxford Abstracts translates into a mobile platform. So if you go to Oxford Abstracts and you load up that program, it will give you an option. And if you need help with this, just contact any of the Julian or Karen or Layla or myself, happy to help you with it, to move it into a mobile app on your phone so that it's easy to move through the program, identify events, save events that you want to go to, etc. There's also instructions in our lanyards. I want to draw attention to these lanyards, which are packed with information. Layla has done a remarkable effort in the spirit of our event to set out an extraordinary amount of tiny print on the back of your lanyards, but it gives you all kinds of information about Wi-Fi and how to access Wi-Fi. Many of you will be able to use EduRoam at the university, but there's also free Wi-Fi available for those of you who don't have access to EduRoam. Again, if you have any challenges accessing Wi-Fi, please reach out to us. We will have significant amount of food and drink to celebrate and share with you. Following, yes, we like that, Neil, well said, well done. Following this evening's keynotes, we'll have a reception behind you. I apologize, but part of the food will be set up as our event unfolds, but folks will be as quiet as possible. Food and drink, note that you'll find in your lanyard a drink tag for this evening. So please, please choose as you will, wine and beer and non-alcoholic drinks and so on. We'll also have a reception tomorrow at the end of day after the book launch. There will be lunch served for everybody throughout the conference on Friday and Saturday. We'll also have coffee and tea in the morning, and at the mid-morning break, there'll be fruit and pastries and all kinds of snacks for you. So if you come without breakfast, you know, once the mid-morning break happens, you'll have a chance to rectify that. There are many cafes around this campus, very close, by which I mean within a minute's walk. So if you feel like you need a little stretch of the legs, please walk around. There's wonderful areas to visit around here and cafes and so on. I want to acknowledge that you're in a really important part of the city. We're in the downtown area of the city, and like many cities, certainly in Canada and North America and around the world, the impact of COVID has had a really powerful and difficult influence on areas of the city that are low income. And that's something that I want to ask you to keep in mind and in consideration. Vancouver is in the midst of a series of crises, and one of the most profound crises that we're dealing with now is a drug poisoning crisis, and that is afflicting the world that surrounds you. I want to note that so that people are aware of where you are and to be respectful of what is part of our world and part of the city that we inhabit. Please note, as Karen said, there's a number of virtual presentations that will be happening in 2245, as well as in this room. There'll be a number of, there'll be 2 events happening in this room beginning tomorrow at 10:30. There are volunteers in each room. So for presenters, if you have questions about uploading presentations and so on to computers, they're all in the room. You should be set to go, and there are people there to help you as needed. We have a photographer, a conference photographer, Joseph Malbon. Joseph at the back, and Joseph will be taking photos. So please, if you would not like to appear in the publicity and other kinds of online distribution of those images down the road, please reach out to me so that we can be sure to address your image and remove your image as we can. Okay. But I just want to alert you to the fact we have a hashtag for our conference. As many of you will know and probably have seen, hashtag MES23 couldn't be easier. Please use that. Helps to build up the regard for the event and the time that we're spending together. And that's it, I think. That brings me to the end of administrative. Again, if you have questions or comments, there's one last thing I should say. There's washrooms on all the floors. There's excuse me, there's male and female and non-binary washrooms around. So there's lots of options for people. There's water bottle areas to water water fountains. Fountains is the word. Water fountains to fill water bottles as needed. So please, again, if you're looking for that, please reach out and we're happy to guide you. Okay. And on that, it's time to move on to the fun part of the evening after all of that. Thank you, Paulo. Okay. I'm really honored when we were creating plans for this event, choosing keynotes and bringing people together through keynotes is an important part of how conferences are organized. We are in the midst in our school of communication. I'm the director, so I can say this. I apologize, but I think I can say this. We're in the midst of a wonderful flourishing in the school. We have a group of scholars, newly arrived scholars, younger scholars, a remarkable group of graduate students, doctoral students who are doing, and I see a line of them right there, who are doing incredible work. Some of that work is being mentored and guided and led by the Digital Democracies Institute. And in thinking about our event today and the work that the DDI is doing, it was one of our hopes that we would be able to welcome them into the event to have that as part of our session. And we were so grateful when Wendy and Amy agreed to be part of our program. So with that in mind, I'll just say a few words. It's a real honor to introduce to you Dr. Wendy Chun, Simon Fraser's Canada 150 Research Chair in New Media and the Director of the Digital Democracy Institute, an incredible evolving institution at the university. She's the author of several works. Many of you will know these works, including Control and Freedom, Power and Paranoia in the Age of Fiber Optics, Programmed Vision, Software and Memory, Updating to Remain the Same, Habitual New Media, Discriminating Data, fantastic work, and the co-author of Pattern Discrimination. Wendy will be leading off our keynote this afternoon, or this, I guess we're into evening now, this evening. And following Wendy will be Amy Harris. This is a kind of bookend that Amy and Wendy are doing together, using different platforms, I want you to know. So there's going to be a little switch moment in the middle of it. Amy is a PhD candidate in the School of Communication and the program manager for the Data Fluencies project at the DDI, also at SFU, as I've said. Her academic background was in English literature. Following an unfulfilling career in personal finance, promoted a change of scenery. Ended up bringing her into working in the communications industry for 7 years. That then brought her to a master's degree in 2020 and now her PhD in our school. Amy is a force, as anyone will tell you in our School of Communication and in the doctoral program, as you will see with nodding heads. Together, Amy and Wendy are going to speak to us about how to sense the future, global climate change and media educologies. It's my pleasure to welcome Wendy Chun to the stage.
Hello, everybody. I want to start by thanking Stuart for the introduction and the organizers for
inviting us here. We're absolutely thrilled to be here, Amy and I, to help launch the conference and help you think about media educologies, right? Media educologies, right? So as Stuart noted, and sorry, I'm on my tippy toes because this podium is made for people not my size. So if I fall over at some point, you'll know it's due to the fact that even wearing sneakers, my balance might not be what it once was. Okay. So media educologies, as Stuart noted, was brought up so we could collectively address three different concerns. The first being the global climate crises and the Anthropocene. The second being how datafication and surveillance are affecting our media ecologies. And the last is how amidst our new media order, communities are continuing to find creative ways to resist and counter the impact of biased algorithms and tech corporations. So this is a rather tall order, and we're excited to hear your thoughts throughout the upcoming days. But we thought we would get the conference started and the conversation started by trying to think through these different concerns. So climate crisis, datafication, and creative resistance together through artworks. And importantly, through artworks that engage our senses to evoke visceral responses. Our goal tonight is actually going to be a little perverse. Because our goal is to explore how we can counter the twin crises of climate disaster and predatory datafication by wrestling with the unsettling ways that technological mediation grounds both crises. So our talk tonight is not a call for us to abandon technology and run away from technology, but instead a call for us to rest with, to inhabit how technological mediation grounds these crises in all senses of the word ground. And to make this point really clearly, consider how differently surveillance and computation matter here. So if you think through the perspective of two, surveillance and computation appear irrevocably bad, right? From predatory learning techniques embedded in personalization algorithms to emotion recognition systems, social media really thrives off unrelenting surveillance and dreams of manipulating human behavior. And this unrelenting surveillance and dreams of manipulating human behavior actually stem from openly acknowledged social engineering experiments on workers, on intern populations, within biracial housing population, and mice. So many captured groups. And these experiments were designed to produce cooperation within spaces of resistance and hostility. So at a certain level, it's no surprise that popular media productions such as The Social Dilemma, for all of you who've seen The Social Dilemma, there's a nice still there, you know, here we are, marionettes being manipulated. It's no surprise that they represent social media this way and for ourselves as rats within the social media cage. But what's arguably surprising and disturbing is that this even counts as an insight, right? So given this history, this insight arguably uncovers what's obvious by recovering as hidden what's in plain sight. Maybe. But at the same time, modeling, computation, and measurement are also key to understanding and resolving concern number one. So in the fields of ecology and earth system science, surveillance is a good rather than a bad word, right? So to understand global climate change, we need to surveil the environment. We need to measure ice cores, tree trunks. We use lasers beamed from outer space in order to understand forest structure. Because at a fundamental level, ecology is 1984 for Bambi, right? So my sweetheart, who's an ecologist, tracks deer in Italy. So he works with folks who collar them in order to understand and model animal movement. And as you see here, this tracking is often framed, the surveillance is framed as saving or protecting or preserving these animals. And not only in terms of general knowledge, but also hunters are told not to kill deers with collars on, right? So for Bambi, it's surveillance or death, right? Unless, of course, you're no longer needed, in which case it's both. Okay. So some of the most fundamental concepts in ecology were actually produced via experiments by a male professor on his female secretary. Right? So he threw pieces of paper and then had her on her hands and knees pick them up. And this is one of the bases for understanding animal movement. Right? Ecology has a hard time with symbiotic relations and frames everything in terms of scarcity and predator-prey relations, because at a fundamental level, ecology sought to take the principles of economics, that dismal science, and apply it to nature. Weather forecasting and climate are computational concepts that emerged via large-scale computational analyses. So computational analyses, especially within the case of global climate change, fuel the very concept that they seek to elucidate. But if this is so, what can we do? Well, the artwork we'll be considering today raise the question, what if the problem lies not with the fact that we've internalized technology, but rather that we haven't internalized it enough? Or more properly, that we've ignored the many visceral ways we communicate with our media, our environment, and our machines, which brings us to part one, sensing climate. Okay. So how many of you believe we're undergoing a climate crisis? Excellent. Okay, everyone with their hands up. Why? What have you found most compelling? Why do you believe this? Okay, weather. Raging fires. Smog. Research. Excellent. And why do we believe that that's linked to something called global climate change? And why do you think people are resisting the notion of global climate change? Media? Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Just media? Okay. Nostalgia. It involves real change. It involves real actions. Yeah. Excellent. So what I want to do is take us through some of the reasons and ways in which we can think about this by taking us back to the initial way global climate change was framed and the problems with global climate change. And that was initially framed as a problem of ignorance, right? So for a long time, and initially, the problem seemed to be that if only people knew, they would act. So folks like Jim Hansen, who's a noted NASA climate scientist, argued in 2005, and this is when he was openly muzzled by NASA, that communicating scientific results and model projections were the only thing capable of overcoming special interests that have obfuscated the topic. So to make things clear, to overcome the fog of confusion and disinformation, what scientists need to do was to, yeah, is it possible to get the lights down just so you can see some of the visuals more? So to overcome the fog of confusion and disinformation, what scientists needed to do was to make and disseminate visuals, such as this Guftal simulation of global climate change, or to use other compelling proxies, such as melting ice caps, or charismatic megafauna, such as starving polar bears, to visualize or to experience what easily can't be experienced, which is namely global temperature. So ice caps are affected by climate, not weather. They affectively register global climate change. And we have to remember that Earth system science fundamentally relies on proxies in order to touch the unknown. So Earth system science relies on proxies such as ice cores, as tree rings, knowable things that stand in for, that measure the seemingly unknowable, such as climate change before human records, in order to comprehend and to predict the not yet known. And because of this reliance on proxies, a lot of global climate change has been attacked. Because unfortunately, this theory that people don't know because don't act because they don't know, and if they would, hasn't fared well. And efforts to inform people that global climate change exists seemingly haven't made much of a difference. So global climate change has moved from projection to fact, and a lot of the things that you brought up is what convinces you about global climate change scientists hoped would never happen, right? That people would believe their models so that those things that you have targeted should never have been experienced, right? So even though global warming has seemed to move from a projection to a fact, little seems to have changed. And even worse, this emphasis on knowledge, though important, seems to have fueled rather than abated denial and inaction. So George W. Bush in the US funded global climate change research more than any other president before him. Because when it's framed as a question of research, does it exist or does it not, it effectively gave polluters 8 more years. And climate change deniers feed off proxies, models, and predictions. Yes? Oh, yes, thank you. Oh, but that's on wheels.
Quite something.
Yeah.
Thank you. Wow. Hi, everybody. How's it going? Great. So this is amazing. Okay, so thank you so much, Stuart. He's such an amazing director. That's all I have to say. So now, intriguingly, climate scientists such as Jim Hansen, who I mentioned earlier, have moved from models of change based on abstraction and modeling towards those based on visceral reactions. So in 2012, after he was muzzled, and indeed he was no longer muzzled, and yet nothing seemed to change, right? He argued that the greatest barrier to public recognition of human-made climate change isn't necessarily disinformation, but probably the natural variability of local climate. How can a person discern long-term climate change given the notorious variability of local weather and climate from day to day and year to year? So the greatest challenge, in other words, is that we experience weather, not climate. And global climate change deniers exploit local variability. So you pointed here to what's the snow in March, and global climate change deniers will say, yes, there's snow in March. Where is global warming? Or they'll point to a cool day in August in order to foment controversy. Now, to overcome this, Hansen argues that we need to focus on weird weather events, events that are 3 standard deviations away from the norm. And these help people experience what they can't, which is namely a changing average. Now, what Hansen proposes at a certain level is absolutely brilliant. Right? So he appeals to people's experience rather than models of knowledge. He takes advantage of rather than seeks to correct people's confusion of weather and climate, and he relies on experience rather than theory. Although, to be honest, what he does is return us to perhaps earlier understandings of theory. So theory came from the Greek term theoria, and it was a group of Greek citizens that would go to another city to witness an event. And if they witnessed it, then it happened. So there's something intimately tied between experience and theory. And this move to embrace visceral reactions to center side effects is also what grounds data visceralization. And let me just note today that the comments that we're giving you are very much involved with a project on data visceralization that we're working with Kelly Dobson, Karina Albrecht, who's in the audience, who's another brilliant graduate student, and Prem Sylvester. Okay. So what is data visceralization, right? Well, data visceralization, like Mendelian genetics, has at least 3 origins. Luke Stark, writing in The Atlantic in 2014, argues that what he calls data visceralizations are representations of information that rely on multiple senses, including touch, smell, and even taste, all working together to stimulate our feelings as well as our thoughts. And for Stark, data visceralization, or visceral data, can help us grapple with the injustices and inequalities that persist by amplifying our gut reactions to hierarchies of knowledge and power that violently shape the rhythms of everyday life, by fostering long-term affective engagements with our interfaces. So for Stark, data visceralization's intrusiveness is also its promise. And you'll notice here that this presumes that somehow our gut reactions are inherently just. Right? And what Stark has done is propose using data visceralization to amplify individual misgivings about information privacy. But in stark contrast, so Benjamin, this is a concept, again, that's been discovered over and over again. Benjamin Lee et al. In 2021 introduced what they considered to be their novel concept of data visceralization. And according to them, it's a concept really embedded within virtual reality, and it's a way to use virtual reality to offer a deeper understanding of data and quantities. So to counter abstract data visualizations and restore basic understandings of units and measure. And what they emphasize too is this notion of emotion or visceral sensations rather than narratives or thought. But what this brings up is that data visceralization isn't inherently about social justice, right, or anti-hierarchical. And we could think through sentiment analysis and emotion recognition systems also within this larger rubric of data visceralization. But the earliest use of data visceralization we know of, and this is what we're working from, comes from Kelly Dobson's group in 2010. And for Dobson, data visceralization engages the body's extensibility. So it explores how sensing and acting extend beyond and shape the body's borders. And data visceralization stems from our earlier work with subtle machines and how humans and machines, machines and humans communicate through seeming side effects such as noise, through what she calls machine parapraxis. And to make this clear, I'm going to show you a part of her early work on data visceralization, which is, hello, we can play together. You don't want to play? Oh, there it is. It was hiding behind a closed caption person. Okay. So let me unmute this and you'll see one of her early projects. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'll just talk over this and you can still see her, right? So instead of buttons leading to whipping or pulverizing, Wendy requires gestural body-based interactions. It requires us to echo the texture of machine sounds. And what her work does is investigate the impact of the sonic, visceral, and gestural and other overlooked subconscious aspects of engagement by making us communicate with our machines via these seeming side effects. And at Brown, she taught a course on data visualization and global climate change. And at this point, I want to turn things over to Amy, because what she'll do is start to explore and deepen this exploration into data visualization as a way to express and counter global climate change. As a way to transform proxies from things out there, abstract correlations that stand in for concepts, into things that we can touch and that indeed touch us. Things that we stand with and inhabit and co-inhabit, things that sensually correlate and correlate our actions. Because the challenge we face now, and this is something Amy will explore more, isn't using data visualization to convince people that global climate change exists, as many of you pointed out, but rather using data visualization to convince people that their actions can make a difference, to make that connection not between feeling and knowing, but feeling and action. Great.
I'm a little bit taller than Wendy, but I might not need the thing, the stand. Do you want to? Otherwise, I'm going to be way too tall, I think. Thank you so much. Hi. First of all, thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you to Stuart and the organizers, to the welcome, and thank you all for being here. I'm actually from Bournemouth originally, so it's nice to have some people from my hometown here as well. So as Wendy has said, and has talked about the limits of visualizations, we're now going to think about experiences beyond the purely visual and into the visceral, and how art and technology can intervene into the crises around us. So we want to start this section with this quote from Lauren Berlant about art activism. And she argues that what art activism does is to interfere with the feedback loop whose continuity is at the core of whatever normativity has found traction. And what's intriguing about this quote is that Berlant frames art activism within and as a communications technology. It interferes. Oh. Sorry. There should be a picture. I don't think the other ones are coming up either. It's all going so well. Okay, I can try again. There we go. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so what's intriguing about the quote is that Lauren Berlant frames art activism within and as a communications technology that interferes with feedback loops, control mechanisms that maintain the status quo. And she embraces technological metaphors. And the work I'll be discussing in the next section also embraces technology in order to interfere with continuity and normativity. There we go. Thank you. Okay. In order to change our narratives, perspectives, and actions. So firstly, I'm going to be talking about the large-scale installations of Olafur Eliasson. Second, the virtual reality game, The Lost City of Mur. And third, the Klimahaus Museum in Bremerhaven. And each of these engages our senses: touch, smell, sound, or movement. And by doing so offers, however imperfectly or incompletely, ways for us to transform proxies from things that stand in to things that we stand and sit with. Oh no. Okay, thank you. So art focused on environmentalism has been a feature at many of the UN environmental events, including COP21 in Paris in 2015. Artists for Paris Climate 2015 was a citywide arts festival of climate culture that took place alongside the UN conference. And as part of this, Olafur Eliasson constructed one of the most visible and famous large-scale artworks called Ice Watch. Ice Watch had already appeared in Copenhagen in 2014 and has since been set up in London in 2018, all coinciding with significant UN events. As you can see in the pictures, Eliasson arranged 80 tons of ice harvested from icebergs floating in a fjord in Greenland in 12 giant blocks in a circle, recreating a clock face, as you can see on the picture on the left, in the Place du Panthéon in the center of Paris. The melting of the ice during the conference was the equivalent of just 1/10 of the ice that melts per second in a Greenland summer. And the construction of the work in resemblance to this clock face reinforces the urgency of the warming of the polar regions. And what he says about it is that as an artist, I hope my works touch people, which in turn can make something that may have previously seemed quite abstract into reality. Art has the ability to change our perspectives, our perceptions and perspectives on the world, and Ice Watch makes the climate challenges we're facing tangible. I hope it will inspire a shared commitment to taking climate action. Like Berlant then, Eliasson sees his work as a way to interfere and change our expectations by presenting an unusual way of interacting with art. He deliberately locates his work in a public place with no barriers, inviting the audience to interact. The scale of the icebergs and their unusual setting, and not in a fjord in the Place du Panthéon, creates a public spectacle. But it was not just a visual display, it enabled us to touch it. And we're just going to watch a real short part of the video that showed a little bit of the interactions. Hopefully. Oh. Too much. That's okay. I can just look at the pictures. That's okay. We can skip to the next one. So anyway, in his own words, Eliasson wants his work to touch people metaphorically, but what results with Ice Watch is that the people want to touch it right back. The images and the video of people with the ice show many different kinds of interaction, children playing, even someone dancing with it. But most people seem to want to touch the ice, like this guy. Several photographs show people wanting to hug it. They can't seem to help themselves. It is compelling. And this is the part that's really fascinating. What does that physical interaction do? Well, first of all, in a very practical sense, the heat created by the human touch makes the melting of the ice happen faster. By touching the cold ice, either with hands, faces, bodies, the warmth of the human body causes the ice to melt more quickly. As a metaphor, this is pretty effective, representing in a microcosmic form what happens at global scale. You and it touch each other, leave an impression on each other, and it leaves an impression on the person touching it, somehow transforming it and yourself. And this serves to create a radically different relationship with climate change. Oh, no, too far. There we go. As Wendy was talking about the proxies, you're probably likely familiar with images such as these that have become common in climate change reporting. This is because the melting of the polar ice caps is used as a proxy for how we know that climate change is changing. By touching the ice, feeling its coldness, even seeing a picture of the Ice Watch changes how we relate to these proxies, because what Ice Watch does so effectively is to bring what is usually so far away very close. To touch something is to make it real. So the next time you see something like a proxy of an ice cap, you have a very different relationship with it once you've experienced touching the ice that the image represents. Secondly, with IceWatch, Eliasson presents a different and disruptive type of art. The most common types of experience with art are where the paintings or sculptures are behind a barrier. Some, like the Mona Lisa, are even protected in glass cases, which became common practice in and around Victorian times. Preservation and reverence for what was considered of great importance became de rigueur, and this approach has informed and still does inform much of our museum and gallery experiences. However, with IceWatch, it actively reverses the notion of preservation, demonstrating in real time how in order to preserve the ice caps, we need to be able to touch them now. Preservation can't just involve the sealing off of artifacts. We need this seemingly destructive engagement in order to have the long-term preservation. Therefore, another one of the highly effective aspects of the work is the ability to sense the impacts of a climate change happening in front of you in real time, not at a removed distance at the remote areas of the polar regions. In bringing the action to the people in a publicly accessible place, Eliasson confronts the detachment usually afforded to information about climate change and encourages people to interact with the ice, to see, hear, and feel it melting, so that the next time we encounter talk about ice caps, we relate it to this physical experience. Sarah Ahmed analyzes these examples of why experience such of these are so effective in the cultural politics of emotions. Here she delves into how emotions and affects shape the social body and the collective, describing how affect can be sticky, adhering to objects and transferring to people who engage with them. As the objects move between contexts and bodies, the emotion sticks to those that interact with them. In considering this in relation to IceWatch, the contact between the viewer and the ice creates this stickiness, perpetuating the tangibility that Eliasson describes in his hopes for the piece. That Eliasson has recreated it now 3 times at various points of high climate relevant moments demonstrates that its affectivity is sticking, transferring, and creating meaning amongst those who interact with it. However, as with many projects that are highly visible that evoke commentary about public issues, IceWatch has come under significant criticism. Critics asked whether the carbon footprint of the transportation of the ice for the exhibition is only exacerbating the problem, and in response, Eliasson includes these figures in a report. And to put these things into relative terms, 30 tons of carbon emitted is equivalent to 30 people flying return from Paris to Greenland, where the ice was harvested from. Where art interventions such as this are seen to fail, according to Margaret Grebowicz, is that in trying to make something real for people who do not have direct access to it, in this case, not many of us have the chance to see icebergs, the representations actually create a greater barrier. Drawing from Guy Debord's theory on the nature of spectacle, what Grebowicz claims is that art installations like Eliasson's are still perpetuating the abstraction of climate change. Further, whilst acknowledging how effective the work is at raising awareness, scholars have criticized Eliasson for not providing more practical information about solutions as to what can be done to try to counter the impacts. Carmela Quizella, Jean-Pierre Chupin, Cynthia Hammond's study on the efficacy of artworks with a didactic approach said that despite its success in being the artwork that had the most media attention of all of our case studies, IceWatch is also, in terms of scale, the most unclear in terms of its aftermath, consequences, and actual change. Laura Summer and Christian Klockner's study specifically about artworks at the COP21 found that the most effective pieces did not just depict the problems of climate change and a future dystopia, but people responded more to those that were offering solutions and emphasizing the beauty and interconnectedness of nature. The lack of information about solutions is one criticism that cannot be made against our next example, as we move from public interactions with real Arctic sea ice to virtual reality in the lost city of Mur. No, it's okay. We're on that one. She said. Or if not, then there are images.
Oh, wow.
Thank you. So The Lost City of Mir is a game that takes place in a simulation of an underwater civilization which has been destroyed by pollution, sea temperature rise, and ocean acidification. Your avatar swims through the environment and undertakes activities such as planting coral and cleaning up pollution. So far, so typical. But where this game differs is how the real world actions of the game player to reduce their carbon footprint also contributes to what happens in the game. The creator, Liz Canner, and her team describe it as a cross-platform interactive experience that combines a smartphone app with VR. And what that means in reality is that what you do in the real world, recorded through your smartphone app, affects what you see in the game in the VR platform. They say that the more you invest in positive action and life creation, the more vibrant and stunning the ecosystem will become. For example, if you choose to take a bus or walk rather than drive, you get rewards and can see the impacts in the game. It teaches about carbon footprints and the impacts of climate change on coral reefs using the immersive experience of being a mermaid in the lost civilization. And the effectiveness of the game comes from its ability to bridge the gap between the imagined virtual environment of the underwater world and its ecosystem with what the player does in reality. Firstly, that the game player engages in this active motion by using swimming motions to move through the environment. And the swimming element was developed particularly for the game. And then secondly, actions in real life to reduce carbon footprint have impact in the game, a link between the real world and the game world. Now, there are other VR experiences that aim to connect people with climate change that have had varying degrees of success. In 2017, Al Gore used VR film Condition 1 to record melting ice as part of the sequel to Inconvenient Truth. And I know there's a couple of people in the audience who are very familiar with this, who'll be talking about their work on Saturday. The footage was released as a VR nature mini documentary at the Sundance Film Festival. And then in August last year was also released using the Within VR app in a series, This is Climate Change. And I won't show any of it now just for purposes of time, but it effectively immerses the viewer in the ice melting. And there's also similar versions of forest fires, deforestation, and drought. However, the others are going to talk about their work on Saturday, but there seems to be pretty little public appeal in trying these experiences, as the films have only had a few hundred views and very little public engagement. There are other games such as Pokemon Go that involve an interaction between a game and actions in the real world, or Endling, which recently won awards for representing climate change. But I don't believe there are many, if any, games that combine real world activity with a VR immersive world, particularly when it comes to climate change impacts. What's so important is that the Lost City of Mir is different to these forms of VR, because instead of using VR as an empathy machine, one of the now largely debunked claims about the potential of VR, it is not about arousing compassionate feelings. It is about ascribing agency. Liz Canner describes this as one of the main goals of the game, and by linking the direct actions of real life with visible solutions for climate change in the game, Canner and her team have created an effective mechanism for doing so. The science that the game draws from is based on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the team were able to showcase the game at the UN conference in 2019. As a result, the UN have then featured the game for climate change educational purposes for youth, further demonstrating that it is seen as having a strong pedagogical foundation by such organizations. As with Elias and Ice Watch, the Lost City of Mir turns what is usually a proxy for climate change, a simulation, into something more dynamic. However, while it may ascribe agency to the players, the Lost City of Mir is set in a fantastical world. And I want to move now to talk about my last example that provides a very grounded experience in the Klima House. So Klima House is an immersive museum about climate change that I visited recently as part of my research in Bremerhaven in North Germany, that in a very different way to the Lost City of Mir, aims to create connections between our actions and their repercussions on different parts of the world. The concept of the main exhibition in the museum is to take the visitor along a journey around the Earth to locations along the 8th degree of longitude, starting in Bremerhaven to Switzerland, Sardinia, Niger, Cameroon, Antarctica, Samoa, Alaska, and a Frisian island before coming back to Bremerhaven. For each area, the curators have recreated parts of the local environment as realistically as possible and highlights those areas' vulnerabilities to climate change, which are very different depending on the location. Interviews with a particular local group or family are featured throughout, and the museum guide recommends focusing on a few of the individuals for visitors to connect with in some of the locations. One of the challenges of climate change is how its scale is planetary. It can feel amorphous, and as a result, overwhelming in how to relate to it. Here, by selecting particular locations and individual people in those locations, Klimahuis interferes with these notions by engaging with a diversity of experience on a global scale with local grounded examples. You'd be relieved to hear that I'm not going to go through all of the examples today, but I could also talk about this place for hours. So if you're interested, I can talk to you at the reception afterwards. So I'm just going to mention a couple of the features here. Firstly, in Sardinia, where the highlighted climate change concern is increased drought and the resultant forest fires, one of the rooms is darkened to recreate night conditions, a tree is lit as if it's on fire, and the room smells smoky. So what is this smell adding? Well, neuroscientists have studied how olfactory signals are closely related with both emotions and memory. So the choice throughout the museum to include such resonant smells contributes to the longevity and meaningfulness of the experience remaining with the visitors. It leaves an impression. The sensory experience is augmented with video interviews with firefighters and residents who are directly affected by the increase in forest fires. And so the inclusion of the scent connected with the experience of being in the room with video interviews of real people grounds the concept with the impact on local populations. Moving along the journey, at one point in Cameroon, you walk, oh, too far. Okay. You walk through a darkened rainforest at night, following low lights, the main focus being the sounds of the bird and animal nightlife. So this picture shows what it's like in light, and I'm just gonna hopefully be able to show you or play a little bit of the video, which So what does the sound element add here? The recreation of the particular soundscape of the rainforest evokes a particular tropical or exotic resonance. However, this exhibit omits the role and presence of visitors, of humans altogether, apart from the visitors, which preserves a notion of wilderness that William Cronon maintains doesn't truly exist any longer. This perpetuates the idea that humans are separate from nature, a notion that environmentalists like Bill McKibben in The End of Nature say only serves to contribute to the climate change. In other parts of the same area, the interpretive panels do describe the reasons why deforestation occurs to connect Western historical and ongoing activities, but these are excluded from the darkened, exotic, evocative exhibit. And in thinking more about what else is happening in these spaces, in potential history, unlearning imperialism, Ariella Azoulay has described the necessity to reject the modes of thinking that established museums and other such institutions that created certain modes of knowledge production in order to repair some of the violence enacted upon populations by colonial powers. She critiques notions of progress through such institutions, instead demanding that we realize that the past is not the past, and that those relegated as part of the past should instead be seen as companions in the archive. There's no easy way to achieve such aims, but museum spaces are changing as diverse approaches break down the traditions of imperial exclusivity. Spaces like Klimahuis, as described, other science museums and centers, where interaction and sensory activity are at the forefront. Tricia Austin has written extensively about the role of narrative environments and says that the role of the exhibition space should be designed to engage with the visitor, arguing that when the visitor is sufficiently engaged, they can become an actor in the story world and move themselves through the story, shifting from conscious to unconscious engagement depending on their own narrativation of self. At Klimahuis, the insertion of the visitor into various environments does aim to engage them with their own actions, but I'll definitely acknowledge that the museum is described as a mixture between a theme park and a science center, and there's definitely a path that they're trying to tread between entertainment and education. To try to ensure that the important concepts are understood by children, the educational directors of the museum work on pedagogical tools to engage the 20% of museums visitors that are formed of school groups. And this picture shows children with particular workbooks with specific exercises that are aimed on focusing the often highly excited children on the important issues. Finally, here, in discussion with the curators, they're also keen to mention that they are conscious that recent studies in psychology have shown that there needs to be a fine line between needing to create opportunities for empowerment so that people, particularly young people, are not overwhelmed with messages of despair when it comes to climate change messaging, something that all three of these interventions have and continue to grapple with. So, to conclude, what we've talked about today demonstrates how the senses can be drawn upon to help people understand climate. The art, the game, and the museum show that there has to be a leap made between the experience and the understanding and action. As these examples show, every attempt to elucidate the unknown brings with it uncertainty and possibility. It brings signal and noise. And yet this uncertainty should not deter us, not foster despair, but rather be the grounds to address the disconnect between feeling and acting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy and Wendy, for a fantastic keynote. To Stephen as well on the keyboard, I want to say, for remarkable technical agility, a fantastic opening, and to set a set of expectations around responding to the environmental crisis using non-cognitive kinds of responses, effective, emotional, physical kinds of responses as a way of becoming part of the climate change movement. We have some time now before a transition into our after for a Q&A. We also have folks coming in for virtually. And so what I'm going to ask is if Wendy and Amy wouldn't mind taking up space on the stage. And I'm going to move around with the Q&A. I hope you won't mind, but I'm going to use my phone because my friend Alicia is sending questions where there are from the virtual. But now is a good chance. Questions for our opening keynote. Would like to get us started. Yeah, just give me a sec, okay? I pass that to you.
Thank you, everyone. And hi, Wendy and Amy. Wendy, I've been kind of like reading your papers and books, but it's a really good challenge for me because there are lots of technical knowledge that I'm not familiar with. But I've been saying that you have been criticizing the inherent bias racism embedded in the design of today's technology and also internet. But however, today you also showed us some good application of technology. So my question is, are you thinking if there are any alternative look of internet, and how can this benefit the people living in this planet as a whole? Thank you.
You know what? I'm going to ask you to hold that.
Of course.
Oh, yeah, that looks better. Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, so part of this really is trying to understand both the limitations and possibilities of technology, and so and the ways in which we can use global climate change science as a really bizarre example to think through in terms of these limitations and possibilities, right? Because there's a couple of things. One thing is that everything people mentioned in terms of why you believe climate change is happening is everything that shouldn't have happened if we had believed the research, right? And so it's this really interesting moment where if we now believe in it, it's because the models have failed. But what's interesting about the models is that They like the predatory and discriminatory algorithms that predict recidivism, et cetera, are based on the past, right? And so what they do is they project what will happen in the future if the past actions remain the same. But as they do so, what the difference between global climate change models and something like a risk assessment model does is with the global climate change model, if we see the projection of our past actions to the future, the goal is then to say, we need to change the world, not the model. And it's in the fact that we question these results that we have political action. Whereas the ways in which a lot of the predatory algorithms are being used now is to automate the past, never question the prediction, but use that as the basis for current action. And so that's always been my fascination with these global climate change models and their modes of failure in action. But in terms of that question of what can we do with these technologies, or how can we imagine things differently, here I find the work of Kelly Dobson to be really compelling. Because one thing she does in terms of these visceral reactions and communications that she sets up is that she thinks about a network in a way differently than surveillance. She thinks about it differently than we need to upload all this data so we can analyze it. So she has this really beautiful companion species. And so a lot of people think of companion robots as these like humanoid, nice robot things that just give old people their medication, right? And so instead of that, she's created these amazing part objects that sync to your breath and your heartbeat. And so create this, this relationship, but they're also a little neurotic. And so they act up and then you have to care for it. And then the idea is to create a relationship of caring that's not based on the smartness of these technologies. These technologies don't gather data in that same way, but rather on this interaction that unfolds. And I think that thinking through this and the possibilities of this opens up different ways to understand how not only are we communicating with our machines all the time, right? So I'm based in hardware. What I always find really interesting, right, is the ways in which like these network signals around us everywhere. And it's just sometimes that you think you receive signals, right? So when I had retainers, I used to go by all the wireless towers and try to like get those retained, but I do think there's a way, if you think about it, and the way signals operate, what your cell phone is doing right now, for example, what your laptop is doing right now, is you read in everyone's data. You read in everyone's passwords, everyone's naughty things that they look at. But what's interesting is that your computer shields you from what you can see, right? So even though your computer is constantly downloading and sending forth, your idea of the network is somehow this personal device, which is only personal because everything's been erased. So I think that part of this question of technological engagement is trying to think through the richness of everything that makes possibly these technological engagements, but that are always erased in our desire to simply have the signal. And here I think that the artworks that Amy really beautifully elaborated upon takes us to thinking through these other relations and what that can open up. So I'm going to turn it now to Amy.
Can I ask Amy a specific question on that, Wendy? Because I think you've set up a really interesting way of thinking about the work she presented to us. And wow, it's a technological dance. That there's a way, when we see the images, particularly of the ice, Amy, I suspect, like others in the room, I felt the kind of really emotional and wanted to be very, I wanted to be physical with the object. And so the hugging and the lying felt absolutely believable and infectious, that that's what would happen as soon as I saw somebody doing it. I think many others would do it. And yet it's happening, as you point out, at COP events. And so what I wonder is that expansive richness that Wendy speaks of around how we come to be part of a response to environmental crisis. how art resonates in those spaces and whether it lays claim to a similar kind of discourse of legitimacy and credibility and mobilization, or whether it faces up. And I ask this thinking of people in this room in media education are often working in places with trying to find new and creatively innovative ways of using technology with folks who are not necessarily professionalized in those spaces. So you're likewise coming up against sort of expectations of what's proper and disrupting those, rearranging the game set, as it were, much as the artists were. I wonder if you could comment on how that work is received at COP and within those kind of formal policy environments, or whether there's a real discordance there.
I don't know specifically, I kind of can only really speculate, but I do think it's really interesting that since these kind of events happen, so the first example of what they call like an eco art exhibition happened at the same time as the first Earth Summit in Rio in 1992. And what I've read kind of described it as this spontaneous coming together as artists wanting to respond to what was being discussed at the policy conference itself. And so it seems that therefore there can't be this kind of coming together of government representatives and politicians without the arts at the same time, which I think is really encouraging. I don't know what politicians think about the art itself, but I think the very fact that the artists kind of feel this need to be there and this kind of keeps happening, and the, as was shown with the Ice Watch and it kind of coming again and again, shows that there is kind of a demand from it from the publics as well, which I can only really see as encouraging. So yeah,
that's great. Thank you
for the question.
Thanks, Wendy. Or thanks, Amy. Apologies. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy and Amy. I really enjoyed your keynote. And Amy, you said something that really struck me, which was that in your experience in these artworks and the museums in particular, you encountered a lot of stories of despair. Now, I work a lot in the opposite direction and trying to find out how we can incorporate in pedagogy stories of hope and change and transformation. So I was wondering what your experience was in those museums regarding stories of hope. Thank you.
Great question. Yeah, and I think that resonates with what the elder was saying at the beginning as well, right? About this need to kind of change things, to focus on the positive and try and give people messages of hope. And what I kind of personally think, and it kind of is this need to kind of just keep telling the stories, because that's where the hope comes from. The presence of people like Greta Thunberg and people like that, they wouldn't keep coming up if people didn't find resonance with them. And these places like this climate museum, and there are numerous other examples around the world as well, places wouldn't exist if there wasn't the demand for them. And so I think the hope is in the fact of their existence. There's a lot of kind of debate in climate change communication kind of circles around balancing this need for, kind of giving factual evidence about what things are really going to be like, and needing people not to be overwhelmed with that at the same time. And yeah, that's a total a balance that needs to be struck. And there's lots of studies that have tried to do to find what that balance is, or to find what is the most effective thing. I'm looking at this as an area where I see particular efficacy and kind of resonance with people and with the movement. But yeah, there's lots of other examples. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Wendy, did you want to?
Sure, if I could just add to that, I think that one thing that's absolutely key about Liz Kanner's work is this idea to make mitigating climate change something that's habitual. And so taking actions such as walking, et cetera, and translating them in such a way that you feel as though you're making an impact. So it's not about hope or no hope. It's about understanding the interactions that we have and can have. And in this sense, I think that the question that we face shouldn't necessarily be hope or despair, but rather the habitual actions which enable a different way of intervention. Because if we think back to the 80s and recycling, when recycling came about, I was like, this is insane. this is stupid. This is not going to change the world, right? We need change at a systemic level, not at I'm going to take this tin can and put it somewhere else, right? But what was really important, I think, about recycling was the way in which it habituated us to believing that our actions should make a difference. So the fact that our recycled goods end up in a trash heap in Africa is really outrageous, and it's fostered certain forms of outrage because our actions were supposed to have certain impacts. And so I really think that weaving together this question of affective engagement and action so that it's neither hope or despair, but something habitual is absolutely key in moving forward.
That's great, Wendy. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I think unless there's another burning question, I think we'll move at this point to thank Amy and Wendy and then move on to the final part of our program this evening before the reception begins. So Amy and Wendy, thank you so much. Never know what you're going to have to do when you organize these kinds of events. Being furniture removal guy in the middle of them. Anyway, listen, one of our, I'm really grateful and want to share thanks to Wendy for getting us started in our thinking and in the works that we're bringing together. That was really fantastically rich and filled with a kind of sense of work that is effective and powerful visually, but also in our sense of touch and how we connect with each other. This sense of connection, which is a theme in your work and is something Deborah shared with us to begin with, is no doubt something that will continue to come back as we spend time together over the next 2 days. To bring this section of our program to a close, I now want to turn the floor over to Carolyn Wilson, who's the executive director of the McLuhan Foundation. The McLuhan Foundation has been an active partner with us in bringing this event together. And as part of our celebration and our work together, Carolyn's going to share with you a new project that the McLuhan the McLuhan Foundation has underway that I think is, as much as anything, an invitation to become involved with. So, Carolyn Wilson, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. And hello, everyone. Just great to be here with all of you. I'd like to begin just by saying what an honor and a pleasure it was for David and I with the McLuhan Foundation to be involved in the work and the planning of this wonderful Media Education Summit. It was really just terrific, great fun, lots of work. The time for the meetings was perfect for us in Toronto. It was around 12 noon, so it worked out all the time. But really, really wonderful to be here. It's really exciting. And certainly coming together has really shown how important it is, right, to have that human contact and connect again after so long. So it's just wonderful. And for many of us, of course, coming together is like a reunion of sorts, you know, seeing people we haven't seen for a couple of years or many years, perhaps because of COVID and other challenges. And then for others, it's an opportunity to meet new colleagues and make new friends and to be inspired by their words and their work. So I just want to begin also by thanking you, Wendy and Amy and Deborah, for sharing yours with us this afternoon, this evening. Just terrific. So I'm here to talk about a couple of things, and I'm going to invite David Nosbacken to come up as well. David's the president and founder of the McLuhan Foundation, and as Stuart said, I'm the executive director. So we just want to talk a little bit about what the foundation is all about. I'm going to invite you to join us in something that we call the Global Village Square. So I'll talk about that briefly, but David, come on up, and why don't you start?
Thank you, Carolyn. I think for many, you can hear the tinkling of wine glasses in your head, so I'll try and be brief. The McLuhan Foundation really has three main functions. One is to create a hub or a platform or a mechanism which makes it possible for those involved in media education, media literacy, digital media literacy, to share best practice, to communicate with each other and collaborate, to do research together, to bridge the gap between theory and practice in research and enterprise. It's really a platform for collaborative effort. And so the McLuhan Foundation, in supporting media literacy, which is its real function, does not want to reinvent the wheel. It wants to know what's already out there, who are the players, and how can they best be supported. But it does not want to limit its involvement to what's already there. So the second aspect of the foundation is to support innovative, maybe disruptive, participatory research among main players, including educators, young people, the industry players who are influencing our lives, the media world, digital world around us, involved in exploratory research to rethink media literacy for the 21st century. And it is, in some sense, a way of rethinking education itself. Because if the real way in which young people understand and have capacity to think critically about the digital world they live in, if the only way we can support them is, the only way we can understand this world is really to support them in thinking through it for themselves. The third function of the foundation is to engage in larger public discourse on the issues, whatever the issues are. So to elevate what we know is significant in terms of media literacy, if I may use that expression, to a larger public forum for a number of reasons, for general public awareness, but really to scale up support for the enterprise of media literacy, often to do with not-for-profit organizations, often to do with government, government policy, government agencies, where the level of support and concern and perhaps getting behind media literacy can be elevated. So we want to share with you some of the work of the foundation. I just recommend to do that. You look at our website, which is just a very brief glimpse at what we're doing, McLuhanFoundation.org. Now, why McLuhan? Well, McLuhan was one of the pioneers of really trying to get a handle on the impact of technologies, especially media technologies. He was a pioneer in this field. He was concerned about the impact of technologies themselves, not just the content they convey. The medium is the message was his most famous expression, but he also talked about the fact that we're now living in a global village, an interconnected global village, which gets back to the point that Carolyn will now talk about. We are endeavoring to engage organizations and people like you to participate on a platform we're calling the Global Village Square, which is an online service, an online platform. The shape it takes over the next few years will depend in part on your participation in it. Well, it's here to serve you, and the way it serves you needs to be shaped by how you receive it and how you interact with it. So with that in mind, I'll turn back to Carol.
Thanks, David. So of course, it's wonderful to be here, and really how lucky are we to be in this place, to be in wonderful Vancouver. But of course, the reality is we hope to remain connected and to build community long after this version of the Media Education Summit comes to an end. So Stephen is going to actually be our special guide while we walk through some of this. So we've established this platform, and really the platform came about because of some work that we've been doing recently that I've been involved in and the foundation has been involved in. And thank you, Stephen. That's great. That's good. We'll stop there just for the moment. Stephen's way ahead of me. One of the things that the foundation is involved in is a project that involves UNESCO Paris. So we've been commissioned by UNESCO to map global trends in media and information literacy, which a project that has started and continues. And in addition, for the first 6 years of UNESCO's MIL Alliance, Global MIL Alliance, I was the chair of that alliance. And through some of this work, over and over again, we heard quite consistently that people wanted some kind of global hub. They wanted an opportunity to be connected, to be able to find out what was going on in the field, to be informed, to connect and to collaborate with people across their own region and across the world. So we established the platform really to support that. So it's in its early days, as David said, it will evolve and develop based on all of you, your ideas and what you'll bring to it. But we're excited about its existence and really recognize that, you know, for all of us to stay connected beyond the conference, to connect people from other parts of the world who can't be with us, utilizing the technology in this way seems only logical, and we're excited about its potential. So Stephen and I are going to do a little kind of a walkthrough, and I can't really see it very well on this angle, but oh, Stephen's got the feed up. Thank you. So obviously, in some ways, it's similar to perhaps platforms that you're familiar with already and you might be using, but in other ways, we hope it will be unique and take on kind of a life of its own and its own identity. So obviously, the feed will, if you look at the menu on the left, the feed will allow you to look at current information that's being shared, posted by people around the world. So a list of possibilities, something from Carol Arcus with the Association for Media Literacy, Matthew Johnson with Media Smarts was above that. So the news feed is current and always happening, always updating. Stephen, maybe we can go to Discover. Great. So top members, of course, it means the best members. No, it doesn't. It just means those members who have been active and who most recently have put something up there for us to take a look at. So you'll see members, a welcome. Stephen, we'll just focus on these spaces at the bottom. So the spaces actually you can find on the left-hand margin as well. So we've identified these based on the work, as I said, from the mapping exercise and our work with the MIL Alliance, opportunities to connect through teaching resources, upcoming conferences, articles, research, and publications. Stephen, maybe you can open up that one just quickly. We'll have a peek at that. So Kathy Hutchin Kawasaki is an active poster for us, which is great, always involved in putting things up. So we'll just scroll through. You can see some of the things that have been shared by Kathy and others, articles, current research, connected events. I know Tessa Joel's had a recent posting, for example. There's Tessa's. And lots of material to investigate, of course, from other members as well. So maybe we'll go to members, Stephen. And so what I love about this, if you click on near you, so this is my page that's opened. One of the things that we hope to do, and this came from people in really every UN region, was an interest in finding out who's at work, who's doing work in their own region, perhaps across the street or across the world. So you can click on that and find out who's active and who's working in your region, which is wonderful. We'll be updating this, of course, and inviting other members to join us as we continue mapping the global for UNESCO. So this is really useful. In addition, once you're a member, you can invite others to join. So it's not an exclusive group by any means, but right now the work, or I should say the access, is by invitation only, simply to prevent trolling. So it's not a public space in that sense, but everyone is welcome. All you have to do is contact us to express an interest and you'll be admitted. And once you're part of the community, you can invite others to join. And so the community will grow. A couple of other things I'll just mention. It's possible to hold live events, webinars, seminars, whatever you'd like to do. And the important thing, of course, is to be able to invite other members to join. So I think we probably covered most of the basics. Stephen, was there anything else you thought we should look at? Great, thank you. So many of you here, actually, I'll just mention, have already joined, which is wonderful. Mark Sermon, one of our keynotes. I mentioned Media Smarts and Matthew Johnson. Media Smarts is a prominent Canadian organization dedicated to media literacy education through their research and their impressive resources in English and French. The Association for Media Literacy through Carol Arcus and Neil Anderson have joined. And the Association for Media Literacy is the official subject association for media literacy in Ontario. And they are especially dedicated to developing resources and supporting teachers in their professional development. Also in the crowd, we have Roxana Merdurkowitz from Argentina. Yanti Friesen from the US is at the back. He has joined us. Tessa Joels, I mentioned earlier. Vitor Tone is here as well, Portugal, which is wonderful. Paulo Granato from Toronto, Stefano Marigio from Italy. So we're building the community and certainly invite all of you to join us. And I'll just conclude by saying that Marshall McLuhan predicted that the internet would offer us something as wide as the planet and as small as our village post office. And I'd like to think that the Global Village Square offers both of those experiences with a few interesting things in between. So I hope you'll join us. David and I will be around if you have any questions. We've got a display table out in the hallway, and we look forward to our time in person here and virtually in the Global Village Square. I will see you there. Thank you very much.
Okay, that brings our program to a close for this evening. However, now the lovely part of the end of the week begins. Behind you, our friends from Meeting and Events Services have been setting up our reception. I think we're nearly ready to go. Is that true? Yeah. So I have, with much gratitude, thank Amy Harris and Wendy Chun. Grateful to Deborah Sparrow for opening up and setting a land acknowledgement for us. Very grateful to Karen and Julian and Isabella for our collaboration, and to Carolyn and David for their contributions and collaboration. It's time to spend time together to meet and chat and revisit old friendships. We'll see you all tomorrow morning. Our program gets underway at 9 a.m. Lots of panels and work that will begin right away. So look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning and throughout the day. Have a good evening, have a safe evening, and please enjoy the reception. Thank you.